Morning all. I had a kind of interesting over the board game last night, but not too long. Don't expect a fantastically fighting struggle in this one. I don't want to give the game away, but I was playing one of my highest rated opponents so far in the season, Stephen Swanson. But Herts League rules means that there's two options for the game: all the moves on the knight, or this kind of adjudication option, which would mean 35 moves in another quarter, and then after that, like sealing a move. So the long game was chosen. It's called the long game, so 35 moves only, and then for sealing a move. So I was black, and Stephen last year helped us win the Herts League Division 1 by beating Chris Duncan. If he had drawn, we'd also have won the Herts League Division 1. And so we won it last year, in the year, and the time before that was 1957. So we were actually really pleased to have managed to scrape a win in that in the league last time, and no small thanks to him. So that was really great. That because Chris Duncan was like a FIDE master. So I was really quite grateful for that. And also, of course, I'm wary that if he can beat Chris Duncan, he can beat anyone in the league, really. And he has beaten me before in the league, and sometimes I've had a good position, and then it's been a German, and I sort of or playing on at the opponent's venue, and in the past, I wasn't that keen to travel, but and usually I like games to be finished over in one evening anyway. I don't know about you guys, but anyway, so I was black, so I played actually French the Feds solid. I'm still using this as a solid weapon of choice in over the board chess, and he plays a kind of solid continuation now with d3. So I played d5, and he plays knight d2, and possibly the engine's right about this opening, actually. Houdini 2.0 indicating to go for c5 and knight c6 and knight f6. The advantage is that I would be gripping the d4 square. I'm wondering, actually, I know we shouldn't be using engines right in the opening, but actually it's the kind of preferred thing. Knight f6, say knight f3, c5, with a tiny advantage technically for black. Black does get a plan here, without blocking that c-pawn. There's definitely a plan that if e5 later, then maybe b6 bishop b7, which is how I've played it in the past as well. This might be the best way to play against knight d2, but I chose knight f6, and this method with both knights coming out relies on this idea of d takes and e5 to liberate this bishop. The thing is, as soon as you play d takes e4, and the bishop might actually be useful on the light squares, and especially if you play e5, then you're weakening these light squares. So I was a bit wary of this possibility, especially if he doesn't play g3 here, which he didn't. He played a waiting move c3. So we have a sort of cat and mouse already at move 5, because I don't really want to move the bishop. Because then this plan is without the bishop coming to c5, and he can either play g3, or maybe he can still consider e5 on bishop e7, and then d4, and then bishop d3. So the bishop doesn't have to vincetto, I think. So here I try to find a high class waiting move, improvising a bit, and the move I came up with was actually a5, because I want to actually make sure he plays g3. And I reasoned what swung me with a5 was that later, maybe b6 and bishop a6 would be strategically useful if the bishop did remain here, or if later I did takes e5. A5 is also holding up against b4s, which might be useful for white. So I thought a5 overall wasn't too much of a compromise to play it as a waiting move here, to see what white does. Okay, so actually he did switch the plan away from fianchettoing to playing e5. After knight e7, he wastes tempo kind of with d4. Now here, if I want to undermine the pawn chain, okay, it's difficult to play c5 because I'd have to move the knight away, but that might be an idea with knight b8 and say b6 and bishop a6 later. Possible. But you can also undermine the pawn chain, of course, at the head of the chain. And I've played knight c6 Frenches before with some success, so I didn't mind, because you sometimes get dynamic f-file pressure. He went for e5 control, bishop b5, but I'm not convinced actually about this continuation now. After f8, this seems very forcing. I think an engine move is just simply taking on e5 here. Just check an engine here. D takes e5. I think it's preferred to what he played with a small advantage to white. Just say bishop e7, then say knight b3. Okay, it's about equal, I think. But what he played seems very committal, and this does get actually quite interesting. So after takes, he played bishop c6, and my first thought was, surely I'm just gonna get this beautiful like light square bishop. I didn't see a problem with that actually. I thought I was very optimistic here. So takes, took on e5, and I take on e5. Of course the check doesn't work here. There's knight f7 or knight g6. So d takes e5, and I've got two tempting alternatives, and I believe now I chose the wrong one. I chose, and I don't know about you guys, if I gave you 10 seconds, what would you be tempted with here? 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, now you may have chosen bishop a6, or you may have considered queen g5. Actually, there's a quiz here. Sorry, okay. I'm going to restrict down the choices now. What would you choose here? Bishop a6 or queen g5? If I give you 10 seconds here. Okay. If we do a pro and con analysis or some concrete analysis of both, let's take bishop a6, advantages of bishop a6. Intuitively I thought, it controls the light squares, stops him castling. I can still try and play bishop e7 thingy, or even bishop c5 and be on f2, and that'll look delicious. I didn't see any major issue with bishop a6. Disadvantage potentially that e6 is more vulnerable if the bishop's not supporting e6, which is a common sort of echo even in 5-minute games on the ICC, that sometimes I've lost games because of e6 being weaker. As soon as this bishop moves, you're always weakening e6. This bishop sometimes is very useful on c8. But how could it be arranged for white to castle on bishop a6? Well, I'll show you that later. Because bishop a6 is the move I chose. But the other very interesting idea, which I was a bit scared of playing at the time, was queen g5, because white has two available gambits here. I wonder if you can spot both of them if I give you 10 seconds here after queen g5. This is why I wasn't that keen on this. There's two potential gambits now available to white. So 10 seconds starting from now. Okay, there's knight f3, which might be the more aggressive gambit, just giving up the g-pawn for development. And here I think the engine actually favours black still, significantly in this position. Say bishop e3, you know, it's given like half a pawn, but is this position easy to play? Let's say queen f5, rook g3. Now, also, is castling queenside out of the question here? Say queen d2. I play a move like this. Could white castle? Yeah. I don't know, because it's a g-file which is open to the king, so this is quite complicated. It's difficult to actually assess this. If knight d4 is possible, then this is worrying. Yeah, it's not such a big deal. It could spell trouble. this kind of variation. Half a pawn, but white's got a kind of attack going on here. So that's kind of murky actually. So maybe you need like a deep technical analysis to assess that gambit. But the other gambit of castling seems to be this is slightly better actually because than the first one, because in some respects, because you're knocking out centre pawn. But no, actually it's still assessed as less than half a pawn for white. I thought at the time, you know, there would be strong initiative and white controls e5. c4 is coming up as a move as well actually. c4, what is the point of c4? Just to undermine the centre, I guess. So say a move like bishop e7, then bishop g5. Okay, so say a move like bishop d6. c5 is given as a move. I don't understand c5 at all. What if it just takes queen c2, right? Okay, so there's some problems here to deal with in this kind of game. Queen a4 on c6. So this looks sort of equalish according to Imogen as well. And so much for this bishop. You could imagine this knight being superior later if it can control e5, pardon me. Control e5 with this knight later. But it's given technically as around about equal. So both of those are round about equal actually. So these stem from queen g5. So that's interesting. There's two available gambits which have their own dangers, unique dangers. But I chose the tempting bishop a6, so I don't know about you guys if you chose that as well from earlier when I asked. But white has a plan here which may surprise some of you. And the plan starts with the annoying move queen g4. So the weakness of the last move is being celebrated here, this coming off e6, pressure on the g7. Stephen was thinking check might be an improvement. It does force a weakness. So queen g4 hitting that, and because that's an underminal target, and I'm not sure how that pans out from an engine perspective. This position, actually, let's just give an example line. Say knight f3, h4. This looked dangerous in post-mortem, to be honest. There's bishop d3 to try and defend g6. We didn't see this resource, bishop d3. You see, without that resource, then black is potentially getting completely smashed. But bishop d3 comes into it. If castles, we were looking at queen a4 as being dangerous. Sorry, that's the point of c5. Pardon me. So without c5, queen a4 will be dangerous if black castles queenside. If black castles into it, just as a direct thing, we thought this was dangerous, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's just about okay. Okay, so that's interesting anyway. So queen g4 was played, not queen h5 check. So queen h5 check does create this fixed target, but if there's resources like bishop d3 to defend, then you know that g6, then maybe queen h5 isn't such a big deal. So queen g4 was played. So I played queen d7 defending e6. And now white unravels to be able to castle queenside, knight f3 pretty soon. Also, of course, this carries the threat of knight g5, which I had to sort of check when I played queen d7. And I thought, you know, if I get to play bishop c5 in castles, I'll be on f2. So even if he takes on e6, yeah, I'll be on f2 after. So bishop c5, but now he plays dynamic move and good move, I think, bishop e3. I think this is one of the better moves here. White just simply wants to castle queenside and rob black at the same time, actually, of the bishop pair. Queen h5 is mentioned, so bishop e3 is mentioned as slightly better for black. Okay, so I might actually be slightly better anyway in this position for some reason. Bishop e3 I took, and I just castle Now without white having the light square bishop, at least there isn't immediate nightmares about h7. So he castles queenside. Now here, some of you might be tempted with bishop c4, an attacking move, which is horribly refuted. I wonder if you can spot how, if you were tempted just to create a weakness here. If I give you 10 seconds here. Queen takes c4 because of that pin. So I can't do bishop c4, so this bishop's a bit silly, this queen's a bit silly here. But I want to see if I can use the queen. So I play c5 for potential, queen b5 or queen a4, but a4 is covered here. Plays rook d2, and I wasn't really kind of. The other thing to briefly consider is bishop e2, but of course, I don't really want to give the strengthening the pawns in the g file, so that's kind of ruled out on that respect. That maybe the g file is going to be important, so I don't want to give up the bishop there. But so c5. The problem is without the bishop pair's been robbed from me. Okay, he's got the double pawns here, but I've got the double pawns here, and this bishop, is it going to be increasingly useless throughout the game? If he puts all his pawns on dark squares, the bishop has no scope for attacking pawns. So rook d2, queen e7, which enables the idea of a4 and bishop c4 actually. That was the intention. So you just get out of this area against queen c4s, but also knight g5 I can now answer with rook f5, defending e6 and attacking the knight, hopefully evicting the knight. And keeping the queen on e7 means if he plays something like h4, I could take and maybe play g6 for queen g7. So queen e7 I thought was a nifty move. In fact, Houdini likes queen e7 here, I think. It did last time when I briefly checked. Doesn't so much now. Queen e7. So I don't know. Brute force seems to indicate as well. Queen e7, good move. The sadness of queen e7, of course, is that I'm abandoning direct, attacking plans of coming over here or here later. But here's ruled out anyway. If he's continually tying me down to g7, e6, the queen I think has to stay around. I don't want a repeat of the Okiki game, the queen going away with the opponent doing a horrible maneuver, Okiki style like this, just on g7, and then getting mated in a funny way. I wanted to try and avoid that scenario. But funny enough, that scenario became more evident now, because the opponent played h4. So he's actually really might be slipping in his rook again like this. So this is the second time now, this season, where this h1 rook h3 idea is cropping up. But the other significant menacing threat here is knight g5 and queen h5, kind of fishing pole thing, because you can imagine this kind of thing where the queen goes here and sacks, and the h file might be dangerous. So I wanted to rule out fishing poles early on. I played h6. He sneaks the rook in, and I'm reminded of the Ukiko game. I'm starting to think, should I just offer a draw soon if I haven't got an attack now? He's putting his pawns on dark squares, so he's making this bishop more and more useless. I'm without my bishop pair. These weaknesses in inverted commas are hardly exploitable, these double pawns. But anyway, I play a4 anyway, to potentially getting bishop c4. He plays a3. And I think, why do I want to move my bishop to c4? It would just be attacking thin air. Am I really going to get this attack on his b2? I can't really attack him. I'm not in a position to attack him. I find it an interesting move, because also I'm faced potentially with h5 and this sort of stuff. Now the problem, the one downside with h5, it would be a pawn on the same colour as the bishop. I played this move, bishop b5, which engines do like. Now if he is overly ambitious, I think he might be in trouble if he plays h5. And actually, to be honest, that was a bit of a check-in here. I offered a draw, and he was looking at other boards, and after some consideration he accepted. And I thought my good friend Alex on board 1 was doing well anyway. I thought he might be winning the exchange, and I thought Roy on board 3 was doing well. so it's only a 5-board match. So I thought, okay, drawing with black against a higher rated player would be okay in the match circumstance here. And of course the time control, which basically invites engine use later after move 35 for adjudications in the Germans. So I thought, okay, this still seems to be a good position. Bishop b5, so it's a respectable draw offer, and he did accept it. Now let's see. Just imagine if he does go for the attack here. So let's see, rook g3. Apparently I'm better anyway here, technically, but pardon me. So say this kind of scenario. Can I move my bishop back? e4. Maybe white has some dynamism here. Takes, that really fractures the pawns evidently. Actually, white would be better here. Almost. No. You see, this is the target. This is the target which is finally available to me. Bishop takes there's g4 here. If it takes g4, if rook takes, then what's going on here? Picking up a4. You see, I don't want a shattered pawn structure like this, and he's still got the nice rook on the d file. It's about equal here. So but it shows bishop b5 makes the bishop potentially useful to come into e8 later. So let's see, forget that, let's see rook f5 now. And does it actually invite e4? Taking over here. Now you see, this shows that h5 could be a bit too ambitious. Potentially, the rooks are active here if I can, get activity like this. So apparently black's doing okay here. We were looking at other stuff like the bishop coming out back to e8 as well. So I think it was a respectable draw timing in this final position of the bishop b5. So I was just pleased to secure a draw against Stephen for the match scenario, and the time limit, it fitted in well, the draw. But we are 1 point down, but I think so. But there's a game sent for adjudication, which I suspect might be favourable to us. Anyway, so we might be able to draw the match. We were both actually without our top players. Barnett was without John Piggott, and they were without their IM Simon Knott. So it was interesting. Okay, so let's quickly review the game. It was a very short game, so not the usual kind of bloodthirsty battle you might expect on this YouTube channel. But there's an element of perfection in the small amount of moves, but hopefully most of the moves of this game are of high quality. So bishop c5, bishop e3. So it's an interesting strategy from white chosen here to inflict the double pawns, then rob black of the two bishops and attempt and go to castle queenside, and the remaining bishop to sort of nullify that by putting pawns on the dark squares. So the whole strategy is very interesting, I think, and which is one which surprised me a little bit. But the gambit continuations, if I'd done instead of bishop a6 queen g5, are a bit murky, as previously discussed. So I played a solid game, I think, here. Now if he had taken, by the way, bishop c4 and I'm on a2 and he's inviting an attack, we could just briefly check that if you're interested. I think it's just asking for an attack. In fact, bishop d3, bishop c4 still as strong as bishop c4. White doesn't need to invite an attack like this, so that would be bad news. Now you can just make sure positionally the bishop's going to be nullified by putting pawns on dark squares, sort of strategy Magnus Carlsen might use in an endgame. It's being used here in the middle game, a3. Pawns on dark squares, every single pawn on a dark square. I've got a light square bishop, increasingly looking silly. So bishop b5 at least gives it some energy to get back to this side of the board where it might be useful in attacking this pawn if white wanted to highlight g6. Okay, I hope you got something from that. Comments or questions on YouTube. Thanks very much.